Right, so good day, class. So, for the coming weeks, I think we'll look into some project management case studies like what we did with the London Heathrow Terminal. But for now, I think we should discuss first what the WBS is, or the work breakdown structure. So, let me read. So, I think this is written in our module also. So, once the project requirements are collected, the project scope can be defined. Project scope is an important part of the project management plan. The primary purpose of the project scope is to ensure that only the required work, no more and no less, is performed to complete the project. The scope defines the boundaries of the project and helps stakeholders understand the amount of work and resources needed to complete the project. So the WBS, or work breakdown structure, is a structure used to break down the project's work to better manage the project scope and to define and communicate the scope. The, the PM Project Management of Book of Knowledge defines the WBS as a deliverable-oriented hierarchical decomposition of the work to be executed by the project team to complete the project objectives and to create the required deliverables. So it's important, guys, that you define the scope of the project. So if you don't define the scope of the project, for example, if you're going to build a building and you don't have a scope, the owner might assume that, for example, in your mind, um, you're only thinking of a three-story building, but since the project scope is not well defined, the owner uh, was thinking already for of a 10-story building for that amount uh, in your contract. So the project scope is really important. So you should define the boundaries of the project. Are the elevators included? Um, are the landscaping included? And what other finishing systems are included in the scope of the construction? So the project scope is really important, and it has relevance with the WBS, or the work breakdown structure. So a WBS may be presented in a variety of formats as long as the deliverables are organized into hierarchy of levels. So there's a lot of formats for this one, guys. So if I'm going to require you to make a WBS, so you're free to make your own as long as what you did is logical and it makes sense. Then these levels increase as activities are broken into more and more manageable pieces of work. When project activities have been broken down into the smallest desired tasks or work packages, the WBS has achieved its most detailed level. For example, a work package in a residential construction project might be to paint walls and ceilings. A work package may take anywhere from a day to a week to several weeks to complete. So avoid making them so small as to be trivial or so large that it is composed of several deliverables. So you should know the balance, guys, when you make the WBS, not making it too big or too detailed, such that it's already quite trivial already. So if you have a good experience in construction, you'll be able to have a much more realistic and logical WBS, or work breakdown structure. Okay, so let me read. Where did we stop? So some components of the WBS cannot be broken down to the level of work packages, as sufficient details about these deliverables are not available during the planning stage. So such components are called planning components, and only estimates can be made. So as a project progresses, more details become available toward these components, and they are then updated in the WBS and decomposed into small activities. So the hierarchical level of the WBS means that all the stakeholders can see the work from a very high level, the big picture, down to the lowest level of detail, providing clear understanding of the project scope. The deliverables identify what needs to be delivered, and the work packages identify how these will be delivered. So, a key role of the work breakdown structure is to ensure a systematic approach to identify the scope of the task and work packages that must be completed to deliver the project. So, one of the major causes of project failure and overruns is unforeseen tasks, which can have negative impact on cost and time. So WBS can help to ensure that all the significant tasks and subtasks are identified in the early stages of the planning phase. So the WBS is the foundation for scope because it helps to pull the project together and provides a baseline for the project scope and resources required. The WBS provides a graphical representation of the project scope, and the visualization enables project stakeholders to see and agree as to the project scope more easily. So this is an example, guys, of a general work breakdown structure. As you can see here, the project is divided into different phases. So if you're talking about a house construction or building construction, probably you'll have architectural, civil, mechanical, electrical phases in the stages of construction. So just have to identify the deliverables and the work packages under them. So a critical learning point to remember is that what isn't in the work breakdown structure is outside of the project scope. So if there are budget and or time constraints, seeing the project scope defined on a WBS allows an evaluation of the project scope to ensure it is delivered within these constraints. It's also an essential tool to clarify stakeholders' understanding about the scope and outcomes, and it can help to reach a common expectation of the project outcomes. So clarification of scope can minimize the risk of stakeholders having different perceptions about the same project outcomes. For example, the client may ask for a construction company to build a house. They may have the visions of a palatial mansion with luxury fixtures and fittings, while the project manager may envisage a basic structure and the minimum quality products and materials. Using a WBS can ensure key task activities are identified, understood, and agreed to. So it's really important, guys, that you have a meeting with of the minds with the client, because um, the client may be thinking of a palatial mansion with this budget, and you're just thinking of a basic house. So it's important really to define the scope. So projects are decomposed into smaller parts to facilitate planning for cost, time, and quality. It's essential to have a divide and conquer approach to project scope and delivery. So creation of the WBS is a process of dividing project deliverables into smaller and more manageable units. So the PMBOK, Project Management Book of Knowledge, defines a deliverable as any unique and verifiable product, result, or capability to perform a service that must be produced to complete the process, phase, or project. So once tasks and activities are identified, resources can be allocated to them. So resources are wide-ranging and can include people, facilities, and tools. So resource needs should be determined with the project team and key stakeholders when developing WBS, and documented in a resource management plan. So the resource management plan provides the specific detail of the resources that are needed. For example, if people are identified as a resource, the resource management plan, excuse me, excuse me, should detail the role description, prerequisite skills, skill levels, and experience needed. So the WBS organizes the scope of the project in a deliverable-oriented hierarchical structure. The hierarchical levels of the WBS mean you can see the work from a very high level. So the big picture down to the lowest level of detail, providing a clear understanding of the project scope. The WBS can be used throughout the life of the project as a baseline for project reporting. So in practice, scope changes are one of the most common reasons for project failure. So if there are, it only means, guys, that if there are sudden changes in the scope of the project, then your project might fail. Because if you change in scope, it also means that you change also in your approach in tackling the problems. And it could also mean that there's also changes in terms of resources that are needed to complete the project. So despite the importance of the WBS, unfortunately, many project managers still do not use these or they fail to use them properly. So for example, it is common practice for project managers to define projects from a schedule instead of a from well-defined uh, scope and WBS. Similarly, project managers sometimes focus on when certain things will be done or how reliable costs are, even though the project scope and deliverables are not clear. So the project's control stems from the WBS or the work breakdown structure. So this is a common problem, guys, even in the construction industry. So most of the project managers and architects, they usually focus on the how long the project would take, what are the steps, but the scope is not well defined. So it is important that you define the scope, and then the scope should be something that is agreed by between you and the client. So both parties should know well what the scope is. Because if you don't know the scope, then you're going to have problems which will lead to the project failure. So the WBS is not just a list of activities or tasks that you must do. Rather, the WBS is a fundamental tool to organize, manage, and control the deliverables and scope. So it presents the end vision, not the means to accomplish. So in practical terms, the WBS or work breakdown structure is what you will deliver, not how or when you will deliver it. For example, so in figure 2, under the buy materials activities, the list of items to buy is not included. The wallpaper, the paint brushes. However, the component activities that make up the buy materials are included. So when all the activities are done, the task will be complete. So listing the items to buy potentially misses out the critical steps in the process. For example, getting to the DIY store and back, payment and unloading which impacts the scope of the project. So in addition to the WBS itself, a WBS dictionary should be created to support the document. So the WBS dictionary provides a detail for the work for each of the work packages, and depending on the project can include a range of information including the work package's name, reference, or other identifiers, accounting and control count, description of work, technical specifications, quality requirements, owner or responsible party assigned, then the required resources. So the WBS uh, is created using one of the three different approaches. The analogy approach is used by large organizations that manage projects with a repetitive nature of work. So in this approach, a previous WBS with similar deliverables are used as a starting point. So if the company keeps good records of past projects, this can be a simple and effective approach. Although care needs to be taken not to over commoditize projects, so make assumptions or fail to consider different needs, deliverables, or contexts that might change the scope of the project. The second approach to creating a WBS is the top-down approach. So which is the most commonly used? So this starts with the end or largest deliverables. And the WBS is derived by decomposing these into sub-projects or lower levels. The decomposition process continues to greater and greater detail until all of the work packages are identified at a level where they can be accurately defined. It is important to involve a range of experienced and or technical stakeholders in this process, especially when activities are mapped to lower levels of detail. So the bottom-up approach also requires a team-based approach. So the bottom-up approach is similar to a brainstorming exercise where people list as many specific low-level tasks as possible. So these lists are then grouped into larger project activities and then grouped into more and more comprehensive activities until the final deliverables for the projects are planned. So there are different problems associated with this approach stemming from time consuming in nature and the lack of control which can lead into a chaotic planning process, running the risk of missing essential tasks. So we have here how to create the WBS, the input tools and techniques. You have the inputs, you should have the scope management plan, project scope statement, requirements documentation, enterprise, environmental factors, organizational assets, the tools and techniques. You have the composition and expert judgment. I think as an architect, it's we are more into expert judgment, especially in smaller projects like residential buildings. For the outputs, you have the scope baseline in the project documents updates. Okay, so I think we'll stop for now at the WBS for this week. So I'll post our activity guys at our Padlet link. If you have any further questions or clarifications, you can send an email or send a message on our group chat. So see you next meeting, guys.